Hello everyone and welcome to our next video. So last time, just to give a brief overview of what we did, last time we started with our test-driven development approach. We wrote the tests to the first email validation for the signup route, and we also wrote the logic for the test to pass. We didn't go much further than that because that's exactly the principle of test-driven development, that code should be driven by tests. If all the tests are passing, I have enough code, right? But there was an issue pending, which I mentioned I would solve. Of course, there was this ugly .eslint.rc.js in the eslint ignore file. And this is because if we come to the ESLint RC, we didn't provide these key parser options, right? So it was not aware of my project at ./tsconfig.json, so it was throwing me an ugly error. So as you can see, I did some additional modification here. I will explain it in a bit, but now as you can see, I can just remove that line and the linting command should work as expected. Yes, so now it's working. Okay, so this was because this parser options was missing in this eslint.rc.js file. So as you can see, there are a few other modifications I did, and they were because the config that we were extending, so we were extending Airbnb TypeScript, right? If you want to compare, I can just open this change list, and I was extending only Airbnb TypeScript prettier. This was also a package that was here in package.json, but that I don't really need it, right? So I removed it. If you look here, I removed the package, and this because it's not a package that is managed by Airbnb. So of course it doesn't mean that the package is bad. It's just that I thought, okay, why do we need to add an additional package if we can get all the configuration that we need for it to work from the source itself? So I removed this Airbnb TypeScript prettier extension, and that is also, so this is also another thing, that extension, it assumes we are working with React, right? So it would add additional plugins and additional linting rules for React. So we will use React when we work only on the clients. On the back end, we don't really need React. That's why this /base here is indicating that we don't want the React linting rules, right? Then I extend the ESLinting, so the ESLint rules from TypeScript ESLint, so the recommended one, and then some prettier rules, and for compatibility reasons also prettier /TypeScript -ESLint, right? Then we need to add a couple of imports to make sure that these extensions, a couple of plugins to make sure that these extensions work as expected. And I did another little change here, and that I added a rule that is going to use single quotes rather than double quotes, right? So I also added a prettier RC file with this rule that to use single quotes. Notice that if I change the rule here, but I don't change the rule in prettier, then every time I run prettier, it's going to put double quotes, but every time I run ESLint, it's going to require single quotes, so I'll always have an error, right? Okay, let me do a little test here. So I want to see if I can use, this is a template literal, or it would be a template literal. It's just backward ticks, but let me see what's going to tell me if I run it like this. Okay, then it's telling me that it has a problem, right? Strings must be single quote, but I don't really want that. I want to allow template literals. So I think that this should now solve the problem exactly. So template literals are these backward ticks here, and they are very useful if we want to interpolate values, right? So if I have, for example, let's say const my variable has a value of testing, and then I want to use my variable here, then I can use this backward ticks and I can simply interpolate this. So this is very useful for us, or I use it a lot in other projects. I expect us to use this in the future as well. Also, we can build, for example, URLs. So something, for example, URL http / dot, I don't know, let's say our app, unsocial.app / user / ID, right? Something like this, so that I don't need to keep track of that ID, or I don't need to make any specific logic in addition to just interpolating it. So of course, this is not good design of APIs for me to have to write down the entire URL. This should be returned by my REST API if I ever make a reference to my user from somewhere else. So keeping track of only the ID of the user is probably not a good idea, right? So I would, for example, write something like this. First request, that would send a request to, let's say, API of current user, and within this first request I would get something of this shape. So I would be able to get a user info URL, for example, which would be the fully fledged URL to the unsocial app. So that would be something of the shape, let's say, unsocial API of user and then my ID here, right? So the front end wouldn't have to know how to build the URL to a specific user. This would be returned by my REST API. But that's a topic for another moment. We will build a REST API. We will also build a GraphQL API. So we'll have both, right? Why will we have both? Because I want to, and because I think there are opportunities for learning. So GraphQL is also a very demanded skill, and I think it's a very useful knowledge. And in terms of, or in the world of microservices, where we have multiple services that can provide data for different parts of our application, to have a unified endpoint where we can fetch all this data, something that's nice. So it's, yeah, I like the idea, but that is a later step in the project, right? We will start with normal REST APIs, and then when we see that there is an opportunity to provide an additional and GraphQL endpoint, then we will implement it. Okay, I just wanted to take you through these little changes, small changes that I did here. Yeah, I think that there is not much. Maybe I could say use tabs to true and tab width to 2, right? So if I want this, let me see if there will be any conflicts here. So if I run prettier fix and then I run lint, then I'm wondering if there will be conflicts. No, there will not be conflicts. So yeah, why is it? Then I shouldn't use tabs, maybe. Yeah, then I shouldn't use tabs, exactly. So this doesn't make sense. Okay, let's just erase everything, and now we will commit. So git add, git commit. That's just a simple refactor of our auth, and update ESLint and prettier configs, right? So everything should still pass. No big problems. And then we'll just push this to the cloud, right, to the remote repo. Okay, now let's write our next test. Remember that we are returning a 422 if the email is not valid. But if I go back to my Jira board, I also need to validate and sanitize the password, right? So my test, before I write my test, let me just start up the jest. So test watch, this should start up my jest with watch all, so that I can automatically rerun the tests every time that I write some code here. So my test is should return 422 if the password is not valid, right? This will also be an async function because I need to send requests. And the first one is I'm going to repeat something like this, right? And I'm going to say if I send data like this, I should expect a 422, right? Let's see if this is going to pass. Oh, it passes. Okay, then there's a problem, right? Or it's not really a problem because I'm expecting 422 if I don't have a password, so this is not a problem. Sorry. But now if I add something like my password is here, and this is going to be, let's say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So now if I add a password of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, will this test pass? Let's see. It still passes, right? It still passes, and there's a problem. There's a problem because my password is correct. No, wait, that's also not a problem because I don't have any mail, right? So here so for me to ensure that I am testing only the password validity, I need to provide always a valid email. So let's say email, let's call it test@test.com. Yeah. And now let's see what happens. So here the email is true, the email is valid, yeah? The password is also valid. So let's see what happens with my test. Of course it fails because it's saying, okay, this should be a valid request, right? So for this I should actually expect a 200, right? I should actually expect a 200. So let me just put everything in one line. Now it's going to be a little bit tricky to maintain it like this. So maybe we put in different lines. Probably prettier, we'll split these things up. But for better readability, let's use it like this. Okay. Okay. So what happens? What is happening here? I'm sending a request to my sign up route, and I am including the email and I am including the password, right? And this is a valid password. So we didn't talk about what a valid password is. So let me write maybe some documentation here. Valid, so checks the validity of email, and I will just write valid email conditions is nothing more than I think that this doesn't add a lot of value here for valid email conditions because we are not writing our own conditions for the validity of email. So standard email formats from the express-validator package, right? So I'm just saying, okay, for emails, they will be considered valid as long as they are considered valid by the express-validator. How about the password, right? So valid password conditions. I want, let's think about a couple of conditions that we want. So at least 8 characters, at most 32 characters. Let's give the user a lot of room here. 1 small cap letter, 1 large what is it, small cap, and small case, or small cap large cap. How is it? I don't remember. That's for stocks. Well, let's call it so 1 capital letter, right? Capital letters, maybe. Yeah, exactly. Letter case. uppercase and lowercase. That's the word I was looking for. Lowercase letter, one uppercase letter, right? So we will be maybe one number as well, right? One number. Okay, so these are a lot of conditions, right? So that means that if I provide an input that has any or that violates any of these conditions, then this is going to be this test should fail. Now you see I would have, for example, 5 it here, right? One after the other if I want to test each of these conditions individually. So let's wrap these little things here into a describe. And what is a describe? A describe is just a wrapper for a couple of it tests, right? So I am going to comment or to add these comments to the whole describe, and this is going to be, that will be test validity of password input, right? And then here I could also follow the same describe, and this is going to test validity of email input, right? So this it here would also be placed within my test. Okay, so what do I have to do next? As you can see, it's a little bit messy, so I'll just erase the whole thing. I don't like it. It's messy and it doesn't tell me anything. Should return 422 if the password is not valid. Doesn't tell me anything. It just tells me that any of these 5 conditions can be true, and I don't know which one. So let's derive a couple of tests from here. So if the password contains less than 8 characters, right? That's my first test. So let's write a bunch more here, and because they are very coupled together, I will bypass the rule that says that I shouldn't continue writing tests if there is a failing test, but I will just write all these 5 conditions, right? So if the password contains more than 32 characters, if the password does not contain one lowercase letter, if the password does not contain one uppercase letter, and the last case if the password does not contain a number, right? So it should return 422 in all of these cases. Yeah. And okay, what we have here is that I think we should also do a little change in this test. And why is it so? It's because let me give you some general scenario here, right? So I'll just write a couple of blank lines and just give you a description of my request. So my request.body is going to be of shape email, and that's going to contain some email, right? Something here, and it's going to also contain a password. It's going to be something here. Now I have one block that checks for valid email conditions, and I have another block that checks for valid password conditions. If I am testing valid email conditions, I don't need to test valid passwords, or I don't want to worry about the password. So I want to check only that the changes in the email actually are correctly validated by my route. So here, it's instead of hiding the password, it makes more sense for me to send always a valid password. And the same for the validation of the password. If I'm interested in validating the password, I'm going to send always a valid email, so that I know that from the validations from the validity of email tests, I know that my emails are correctly validated. So in the password, I can worry only about validating the password, right? So how am I going to do that? Well, remember that we had those little commands before all, right? And the before all is a function that we can use to run some code, so to run some, let's say, setup that has to be performed before all the tests of this describe block are executed. So here I'm going to say, actually I don't even need to have this before all here. I can just define a constant, right? So let's say const password is going to be equal to valid password 1, so that it's valid. Does it fulfill all of these conditions? Yes, it fulfills all of these conditions as my password. And then here, whenever I'm sending my request, I will always send password, right? And then password is always going to be valid. Yeah. Good. Maybe I could do, just for us to stick to the, let's say, more test structure, I'm just gonna set my password here, and then before all, the password is going to be a valid password. So it doesn't do anything, but I mean, maybe if we need to do some additional setup before all, but in our case here, that would be virtually equivalent to writing something like this, right? So let's see if our tests are passing. Let's see if there are any problems with our tests. No, of course there are no problems, because these tests have no assertions whatsoever. And now these tests have, they are always sending a valid password, which for us at the moment doesn't really play any role in our request. So, but at least now, so here I can also write, actually, yeah, I would prefer to use the before all for clarity, right? So why do I say that? I will come to that in a minute. And password is equal to valid password 1. And here I should also, I want to type this as a string, but this is unnecessary because it's already inferring. Okay, everything's still passing. Here it doesn't add a lot of value, but if I start having, let's say, 4, 5, 6 tests, and I start declaring functions here outside, right? Not functions, but variables. Variable 1 is some value, and then const variable 2. So const variable 2 is some other value, right? Then this starts getting very, very confusing very quickly. So by using these lifecycle methods, I can ensure that I am setting up things at the right places. I'm not messing up my code. So I'm going to have my email, which is valid for everything. And before all the tests, I want to set my email to a valid email. So my email is going to be test@test.com. And then here in my request, in my test, of course, everything is going to pass still because I'm just doing a before all. I didn't change anything. But now I can come to my request, and I should, for example, if I am sending a valid email, I should expect a 200 from all of them, right? So this is going to be deleted right after I run the tests, but I just want to make sure that it works fine, and all the tests should still pass. Exactly, all the tests are passing. So now this doesn't play a role, doesn't play a role, doesn't play a role, doesn't play a role, and doesn't play a role. I'm just ensuring that my email is valid and I can focus on my password, right? So should return 422 if the password contains less than 8 characters. So how do I write a test for this? Right? If I write a test, for example, valid, if I say that my password, so let me copy and paste the request here, right? If I say that my password is valid, this is a bad test. Why is it a bad test? because it's violating more than one condition, right? It's violating the condition that it has less than 8 characters, but it also violates the condition that it should have one uppercase letter. It doesn't have one uppercase letter, and it also doesn't have a number. So we are not really testing the contains less than 8 characters. We are testing contains less than 8 characters and does not contain one uppercase and does not contain a number, right? So this is not a good password for this test case. A good password for this test case is a password that fulfills all the other conditions except the one that is being tested. So a good password here would be valid 12, right? Valid 12 fulfills all the other conditions but does not fulfill my condition of less than 8 characters. So this should fail. And I should expect a 422 here, right? And my email is going to be valid. I should expect a 422, but of course this test is going to fail because it's going to give me a 200 because it doesn't look at the password field within my signup route. So I don't care about the password field if the only thing I'm validating is the email. So if I save this now, this is going to fail. Of course it's going to fail, and that's very good because now we know that we should go back to our code and we should implement this functionality for testing about less than 8 characters, right? Okay, back to the code. So we will add a new entry to this array of handlers here, and here I want to check my password, and I want to check that length, I don't remember what is the isLength exactly, so that the isLength has a min of 8 characters, right? And here I want to add with message password must be in a valid format. Okay, so let's see if the test is now going to pass. Oh, it passes. Very nice, because we are now ensuring that, okay, if the password is not valid, then it is going to return me a 422, right? If I don't have a password whatsoever, this is also a, so let me actually add a new test here. It should return 422 if the password is not provided, right? And this async, and this is going to be the case where I'm just going to send my valid email, but I'm not going to send my password. And I'm going to do the same here with the email. So you see that I have two. I will break this down into two tests. Should return 422 if the email is not provided. So here I will send only a valid password, right? So this here is going to be the scope of my little test, little first test. Okay, everything is passed as expected. So everything is working correctly, right? And I will add, so should return 422 if the email is not valid. And of course, here there is a very basic test that's missing. Should return 200 if the email is valid, right? We are not testing for the validity of the email, so let's add that into our test. And the email here, I'm going to put the test at test.com. And here I also want to test that it should return 200 if the password is valid. Async, and still everything should be passing. Oh, I have a failing. Of course I have a failing because I forgot to update the return of this. It expected, it sends a 200 and I should expect a 200, but I was with a 422 here, right? So maybe you were shouting at me that this guy here should be 200, and yes, it should be 200, you're right. So now it passes, yes. Okay, good. We have then the test for the password that contains less than 8 characters. So let's check now the password that contains more than 32 characters. So I'm going to copy and paste this here because I'm lazy. And again, I need to fulfill all the other conditions. So these are somehow mutually exclusive. If I have a password that is longer than 32 characters, it is longer than 8 characters. And if I have a password that is less than 8 characters, it's also less than 32 characters. So I don't need to worry about this. But let me do a couple of copy and paste here, and I think that we have 49 characters. So we have how many? 42. So this should be enough, I think. I just don't want to write too many. So this should give us a 422 because it's an invalid password, but it's going to pass, right? So sorry, I mean pass in terms of send a 200. Yeah. Why is it so? Because I'm just checking for the minimum amount of characters that I want to provide or that I expect from the password, but I didn't write any maximum boundary, right? Minimum, maximum is going to be 32, and this message I'm going to be a little bit more specific about it. Password must be between 8 and 32 characters, because then it's very clear what the problem is. And now my tests are passing because with a longer password this whole thing fails, so it returns me a 422. Nice. We then can move to the next test, which is does not contain one lowercase. So it does not contain one lowercase. It's very hard for me to write always like this, but so we just want to make sure that this password here does not contain a lowercase, but it satisfies all the other conditions. So I have 14 characters, which is between 8 and 32. I also have one uppercase letter, and I also have a number, right? And I expect this to fail, but my request is going to come back with a 200 and my code is going to fail. So my test is not going to pass because I got a 200 instead. So now I need to come back here and I need to define that I want to check again the body, password, and now I want to check for contains, right? But here I'm not sure how I can check for the, let me see, what is the, maybe I need to do a regex. I don't remember exactly what the test is, so let me just do a quick browse, quick check here. I did a bit of research and I found this quite interesting proposition here where we can test in isolation for each of the cases that we want to validate. And why is it that we are going to test in isolation? Because I want to have different messages, right? With message, password must contain at least one lowercase letter. This is how we write it. So let me just adjust this here, lowercase, uppercase. And now, as you can see, this will, as expected, this is going to fail, right? So, sorry, I mean, I get a little bit confused when I say fail. Is the request is going to fail and it returns as a 422. So this is working correctly, right? And all the other tests are still passing. Now we go to the next one, which is does not contain one uppercase letter. So now I would have valid 1 2 valid 1 2, and if I run this, then all the validators should pass and my request should return a 200, but I wanted to return a 422. So let's see if this is going to fail. Exactly. So I expected a 422, but I got a 200. So now I need to validate again that my password needs to contain one uppercase letter, and I will do it very similar. This is again as proposed by this approach here, and password must contain at least one uppercase letter. Right, so now my test here should pass. I should receive a 422, so my request should fail, but my test should pass. Exactly, so everything is passing. Now the last validation that I want to do is that it should contain a number, right? So here, if it does not contain a number, this is still going to pass. Of course, I'm missing the capital letter at the beginning. So this is going to, the request is going to be successful, and it's going to return me a 200 code. So this test here is going to fail. Good. So let's make it pass. What we need is, as specified here, I can use the backward /d to as a placeholder for all the digits, right? Password must contain at least one digit. Maybe here I think digit would be better to write. One digit. Let's see if it passes. Now it passes. And of course, all the tests are already, all the validations are already in place. So now if I have a valid 12, then I should get a 200, and this test is going to pass. Very nice. Very well documented, right? You see that this not only helps us to understand each of the conditions of the password, but it also provided us a very good design, because now if, for example, I want to test for a password that is invalid, let's see some of the examples here. So maybe because I don't really have the code at the moment, so I don't have a postman, I'm not doing a request via postman, let's create an invalid case where I have seven characters, no numbers. And let's see what is going to happen. So I can, of course, access the response from this request here, right? And I can console.log this response. And let's see what's going to send to me. Okay, that's a lot of things. So let's maybe response.data. I think that this would give me the errors. If I want to print out the response here, I need to do a console.log, and that is a response.body. It's not data. I was a little bit mistaken. So now the problem is I'm not sending any errors, right? So I'm just sending an empty body. So of course my console.log here is going to be empty. But as soon as I send errors.array, that's a method that is going to transform the errors from an object to an array. Let's see what it prints here. So as you can see, there are two errors or two validation steps that are violated by this password. It doesn't contain a digit, and it doesn't contain 8 characters. So a validation like this allows us to have very clear messages of what is being validated, right? Remember that we started, so let me just erase this because this is irrelevant for us. But remember that we started at the very beginning by writing a very general test. And this was not enough for us to test the functionality that we wanted for our password. And so now, because we had a test-driven approach, we broke this down into the different cases that we had to test. And because we were implementing one case at a time, we have implemented a very clear flow of validation for the inputs of my route, or for the inputs on the parameter, not parameter, for the body of the request that is sent to my route. And this is one of the main benefits of writing the tests first. They give you a much better idea of how you can structure your code. Remember back to what I mentioned about the tests driving the design. Maybe you will do it not in a such detailed way, but as you can see, for us it was not an effort. We were not thinking, oh, would it be better for me to include one message or 3 messages? Would it be better? No, it doesn't matter, because I'm just making the tests pass, right? No need to worry about whether this is the best design or not. This is the design that satisfies my unit tests, and we will stick to that. And honestly, I don't think this is a bad design. I think this is a very good design, because it clearly says what is going on our backend. Everything is passing, and as such, I think we can come to an end here to this video. This was a little bit lengthier video, but I think it was also quite productive in terms of helping us to define some tests, right? So if we look here at the output of our test file, then this is very easy to identify which tests belong to which group. That's why I use this describe here. We will have more tests, right? In the next video, we will implement the tests for this one, and then we will move to our next implementation, so to our next functionality, so the subtask in Jira. Just a little thing that I want to do is that I want to, before checking the length, I want to trim, right? So this is something that we normally do, and this would be the case that the tests here, they are virtually missing a little bit the point, right? So this is a case where we should know that we should trim the information before actually sending it. So for example, if I have a test, right, this is just an example, so I'll erase this later, but suppose this number of characters, it has 13, and if I don't trim, then this test here is going to, it's going to return a 200, right? And if I come to if I start, where is it, test watch, then this whole thing should fail. It should not, the test should not pass, but we want it to pass because the password has actually less than 8 characters. There's just a bunch of white space here. So now if we trim things first, then everything should pass. Exactly. So we just need to trim it first. This doesn't come directly from the requirements, but it's maybe would be a precondition, right? A pre-processing step that we need to make sure that this works, right? So that's the only comment I wanted to make before stopping the video. And yes, I think that this is good enough for us. Everything's passing. Git add status, yeah, Git commit. So that's again a feature for the auth add password validation. Let's see if everything will pass, and don't remember if I did any mistakes. Let's see. Yes, everything's passing. We're good to go. And we do a little bit of formatting here. I think not in this case, but here, right? So it's very nice now, well formatted. We can see clearly which tests are being executed, and I'll push this to our remote repo with a bit more code. Good. See you in the next video then. Thank you. Bye bye.